Okay, it is 3 o'clock, so I'm going to get started. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. My name is Allison Lynch, and I'm the staff attorney here at Disability Rights New York in the Mental Health Advocacy Program. And I want to welcome you all to our third in a series of 4 panel discussions by DRNY about the issue of disclosure as it relates to non-obvious disabilities. We've previously had 2 sessions, one on employment and one on education, and I encourage everyone to check those out on DRNY's YouTube channels. We'll be adding captioning and some kind of post-production editing elements soon, and so once this series is done, all 4 will be available for you to review and listen to if you happen to miss one. During those panel discussions, there have been some really robust conversations and interesting observations as they relate to a fairly narrow topic where disability and disclosure is concerned. This session might feel a little bit different because it deals with something that is pretty broad and maybe even kind of anxiety producing or kind of concerning because we're living it, and that's the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and how people with non-obvious disabilities were and continue to be affected by it. So next week, I want to just plug this in our final session. We'll be doing a Q&A. And so any questions that have been submitted during the first 2 sessions and this one will be answered by DRNY staff during that Q&A. So if you were unable to listen to the first 2 sessions live, you can feel free to check those out in advance and send any questions that you have to our email address for this purpose, which is disclosureqa@drny.org. And so next week at this exact time, we'll be doing a big discussion, kind of free-flowing conversation about some of the questions in all 3 of these topics that have come up. So before we jump into talking with our panelists, I want to briefly just give some background for those who might be joining us on this series for the first time. Disability Rights New York, or DRNY, is New York State's protection and advocacy system. And this means that our role is to advocate for individuals with all types of disabilities across New York State. And a few months ago, several of us were discussing the impact that non-obvious disabilities have, in particular, in a variety of contexts. For example, one of the discussions that we had pretty regularly was about mental health, and we ended up releasing a podcast about how Naomi Osaka, the tennis player, had to publicly come forward and disclose her mental illness and the reaction to that and the kind of concerning way that some people responded. So because of discussions like that, we pinpointed several areas in which we felt that non-obvious disabilities can make things particularly challenging. And we wanted to create a space where people with lived experience and people who provide treatment and help can talk through some of these issues. We decided to focus on education, employment, and COVID-19 because there are so many ways that these particular areas have impacted many of our lives. And now, recently, in the last couple of weeks, there have been a number of guidances released about using disabilities that were created from COVID-19, sometimes called long-haul COVID or COVID syndrome, and putting those in the same category of protection as other disabilities under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So this isn't going away, and this isn't a conversation that's going to end as people continue to get vaccinated and continue to feel like things might eventually kind of take a turn for the better. These types of disabilities are still very, very prevalent and will be moving towards the future. So we felt like this was a really important part of a conversation that we needed to have. Before I introduce the panelists and get started with some questions, I am also going to just briefly introduce myself. As I said, my name is Allison Lynch, and I am a staff attorney here at Disability Rights New York. For accessibility purposes, a physical description, I am a white female in my mid-30s with reddish blonde hair and blue eyes. I'm sitting in front of a blurred Zoom background, and I'm wearing a black blouse. My preferred pronouns are she and her. I currently work in the Protection and Advocacy for Individuals with Mental Illness program. And so this means that I work almost exclusively with people who have non-obvious mental disabilities. Again, for the sake of disclosure, I will also say that I identify as a person with lived experience. I have a visual disorder called achromatopsia. That means I am legally blind and colorblind and light sensitive. I also am in the process of managing and treating a diagnosis of long haul COVID symptoms. And there's not a great name for it yet. And that, again, just highlights one particular challenge of non-obvious disabilities where, newly diagnosed people are not always able to have enough information about the problem, the diagnosis, or places to turn to get information about it. So, it's hard to disclose. It's hard to have a conversation when it's not an easy thing for people to talk about. So that's enough about me. I'm going to turn to the panelists now, and I'm really excited to have all three of these individuals here to share a little bit about their experience and their work. And I'm very grateful for their time that they're taking today. First up, we have Laquanya Haggray. Laquanya is a licensed mental health counselor and a level 2 credentialed alcoholism and substance abuse counselor. She is also certified as a trauma specialist and is the founder of Ready Counseling Services in Albany. And Laquanya, before we get started with questions, would you mind just giving any other introductory information and a brief physical description for me?
Yeah, sure. I am a African-American, pronouns she, her, hers. And at this time, I have braids in my hair and I have on a burgundy blouse and wooden earrings. I also am a professor at Sage Adjunct and the founder of Capital District Clinicians of Color, for people who are among the minority group to come together and support one another in our unique struggles, barriers, and concerns as therapists.
Thank you so much. So for my first question, I just want to see if you'll be able to talk a little bit about what kind of changes you've noticed in your practice over the last 18 months or so with the pandemic. Did you notice any kind of trends or any new unexpected issues that have arisen?
Absolutely. First, going virtual, right? Instead of meeting people face to face and having to work with people who have phobias or traumas related to being in public places, who have worked on that and then had to return to being on their own and doing virtual sessions. So that has been, for sure, something that has come up.
Do you feel like virtual has negatively impacted across the board, or are there any circumstances where you think it's been somewhat of a positive?
I think it's been a positive to help people who have anxiety and fears with regard to coming into public places in terms of being able to be social and connect with other people and to get out into their neighborhoods. I think that that has been a challenge. And also the assumption that everyone has the technological ability to connect with virtual sessions has been a significant challenge.
What are some of the ways that you've kind of problem solved to overcome that with clients or patients that you see who might have that anxiety that you were talking about?
So we've worked a lot with mindfulness and meditation, and in some ways, people who have had and maintained minimal risk, I have allowed to come in still, as long as it didn't put them at any increased risk of coming into therapy.
And I know in an earlier conversation, we had talked a little bit about some of the other maybe difficult or problematic trends in your practice that you had seen. And you had mentioned that the rise in domestic violence was also really concerning. And that, of course, is something that can lead to a lot of potential trauma and PTSD. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Yes, absolutely. During the pandemic, we've seen an increase in traumatic experience and also re-traumatization. So part of the definition of trauma is feeling unsafe and uncertain and unsure. And this experience has provoked and brought back those feelings for a lot of people who have had those experiences. When it comes to people who are in their own home with an abuser, someone who is, violent toward them emotionally, mentally, physically, financially, it's closed the quarters for those people, and it's closed them out of even some reprieve that the person would be going to work, or the person would be leaving the home, or given lack. Then now they don't have a reason to leave the house because no one's really leaving the house, and groceries are being ordered in and things like that. So it's been a tremendous worry for people in the mental health and working with people who are victims of domestic violence, because we have to figure out and be a little bit more creative in our helping strategies.
And that is a really good example of a non-obvious disability, that re-traumatization and the potential lingering trauma that can happen. Is that something that ever comes up in terms of how someone feels that they're able to present themselves now to the world with all of that happening, but really not have it be a physical, observable thing that they're going through?
For sure, people's esteem has been affected. Their confidence has been affected. I work with a lot of people with addiction, and I've seen people who've had 30 years of sobriety use again because things just feel really uncertain for them. And so when they have to present to other people, the confidence that they once had is diminished significantly, because they don't feel sure of themselves or of the world or even the people that they're communicating with.
And what are some basic strategies that you have been able to talk through with some of these individuals?
Yes, so I took some notes to share about that. So we are seeking new resources. With the pandemic, a lot of new things have come up, and people are having to be creative in their expression and how they get out, how they connect with people, how they cope with things, and they're sharing them on lots of different platforms. So social media, YouTube, things of that nature. So figuring out what new resources are coming up, staying, kind of keeping your ear to the ground and hearing what's happening in the community. Or creating our own resources, starting your own blog, or going live on a social media platform and sharing what you're feeling, or even reaching out to people that you wouldn't typically reach out to, but it's like, oh, I haven't spoken to that person in a while. The benefit of things shutting down, really, one of them was to be able to reach out. And I think that we've had to use that a lot in this past year and a half.
That makes a lot of sense. In terms of social media use, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I feel like a lot of the time social media can be kind of painted as problematic or tough for people with mental illness or non-obvious disabilities. Do you feel like that's changed because of the pandemic, or is it just that people are able to find more kind of niche communities to engage with?
Yes, I think it's the latter. What I've helped a lot of people do is, well, maybe don't stick to your page or your newsfeed, but go to the groups that you found, and so there are groups for a lot of different areas of interest, so some people are, into pins and selling pins and sharing and swapping pins, or sharing ideas about traveling, or sharing ideas about things that are happening in the community, ways that they can connect, or a virtual group that may be coming up, or even some support groups that are specific to the person's disability. So really sticking into those areas and not just on their live feed, so that it's not as much as the comparison that social media gives us, but it's more so specific to what we need.
And can you talk a little bit about kind of the value of being able to make those connections as someone with maybe a mental illness, where it's harder to present yourself and find people who are immediately going to be understanding because it's not something physically apparent? What's that feeling for people on social media or on other platforms to be able to make those connections if they have these non-obvious disabilities?
Yeah, it's a feeling of relief. It's like like I can breathe, and I can breathe a little lighter, and I can see that I'm not alone in this. And other people are dealing with the same exact thing that I'm dealing with, and they have the same exact fears that I'm experiencing, and specific to what I'm dealing with. And so a bit of disclosure for myself, while at the very beginning of the pandemic, I became diagnosed with breast cancer, and it was so different than if it was not pandemic times, right? Like there were so many resources that would have been available to me. But what they did was people sent me to support groups virtually, and they sent me to groups on Facebook that was specific to people with breast cancer. And I could go there and say, oh my goodness, I went to this appointment today. This is what happened. Help, literally help. And 50 comments later, I'm like, okay, I'm not alone. I can get through this. I can see my way through this. And there's this group of strangers who literally care just because I am like them.
Yeah, that's a big feeling of relief. I know I have also had some instances of that when I was trying to navigate this post-COVID respiratory stuff, being able to hear, yeah, you're not crazy that you're still having these problems 6 months later, or
Yes.
Here are some things that worked. It is very validating, and it's very kind of empowering in a way.
Absolutely. It makes you feel like you can get through things when you feel so alone, and when the world is literally closed down around you. It's like, no, we're still here. We are here, and we're here with you.
Do you feel like that's going to be a kind of more permanent cultural shift once we start to ease our way out of this pandemic? Or do you think it's simply because we're all still kind of stuck at home to some extent?
I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful that it will be something that stays. Part of the beauty of the pandemic, I'll say, for lack of better words, is it caused us to tap into things that we rode bikes for the first time in decades, and I became a gardener in my own home, and things that we never did before are things that we decided, like, oh, I like this, a lot of home painting, and keeping within your small group of loved ones and sharing things like that. I'm hopeful that it's here to stay, and I'm hopeful that as we navigate this new world, whatever it's looking like, we can refer back to what helped us to get through, what helped us to feel a sense of calm and feel a sense of connectedness in a way that is completely different from anything we've ever experienced before.
That's very encouraging. I really hope that's the case too, because there are so many good resources that have come out of this.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of on a similar note, how do you think that disclosure of these types of disabilities, be they mental illness, physical illness that either has been exacerbated or has started in the age of COVID, what do you think the disclosure process is going to be once things start to return to normal in terms of school and work and life? Do you see a change there?
I think I am partial and biased because of the work that I do. And even as a teacher, as a professor, I have implemented that very conversation in every aspect of teaching. So if you're stressed and you're anxious and you're feeling overwhelmed with classes, simply let me know and we will figure it out. So I'm hopeful that we can normalize the fact that we are all human and we all have areas of struggle and we can get through this together as opposed to the stigmas that have been attached to it previously. What I've seen in so many ways is an increase of people saying, hey, I'm depressed, or hey, I'm struggling with my addiction, or I'm feeling re-traumatized again. I've seen an increase in that and people embracing as opposed to shunning. And I'm hopeful that that will continue.
That's great. That would be really, really fantastic for a number of people.
Yes.
Before I move on to the next panelist, do you have any resources, advice, materials, anything that you want to make our audience aware of, either about your own services or about things that people might find helpful if they're in this situation, or any kind of final words before I will bring you back eventually for a couple more questions?
Mm-hmm. So I will say reach out. I will say reach out no matter what you're thinking. Someone cares and someone will listen to you, and explore the resources both virtually and within your community, because you are not the only one. I am reachable at info@readycounseling.org. You can send us an email and we will, if we don't have the services available, because we are mostly virtual, we will help you find and connect with wherever you need to go to get help that you need. But don't stop and continue to advocate for yourself, and we care.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael's got it. Thank you. Thank you so much, Laquanya. We'll hear from you a little bit more, but now we are going to move on to our next panelist, who is Michael Lettman. Michael is someone who has done a number of things in his community. He is a writer, a broadcaster, an interviewer, a student. He identifies as a person with autism and has been acting as an advocate for himself and the wider community. He has his own blog and YouTube channel where he discusses and documents his life. Michael, before we get started, can you give everyone a quick physical description of yourself, please?
Hi, everyone. I am Michael Lettman. I'm currently a student attending the Melissa Reggio Higher Education program at Kingsborough Community College. I'm currently in my second year, and starting next month, I'll be in my third year. Next month's also my birthday month. So, and as of right now, as an advocate, I've been trying my best to do more with my project as I continue to articulate what it's like living with autism, while at the same time try to become any kind of help for the autistic community, plus the disability community, of course, any people with disabilities, and trying my best for them. As I hope for all of us to live in great happiness.
Absolutely. And you've done a really, really great job of getting your voice out there and making your presence known, and, being probably a source of comfort for a lot of people, either who have autism or who know someone with autism. Can you've been very open on your channels before. Can you talk a little bit about how the pandemic has affected you and your life?
With pleasure. The pandemic affected me very, very negatively. The pandemic took away the freedom that we all used to have. Yeah, and it made me locked in my own home. I separated myself from the outside world. I don't care how others may have been a little impatient to get their freedom back. I followed the rules. I wanted to stay locked in my home and try to get used to my new remoted life of doing my daily life while being locked in my home and never step outside ever again, because the outside world now very very dangerous and deadly. And I have to be honest, on my channel, I don't think my viewers cared about a video of me talking over 11 minutes about my honest thoughts about the pandemic. Oy,
Yeah.
I can't.
It sounds like you have experienced a lot of anxiety and have been kind of concerned about how things have been going since the pandemic started.
Mhm.
Is that something that is new since the pandemic? Is that anxiety something you've had to learn how to deal with?
Yes, I feel like the coronavirus pandemic, it definitely changed the world. It completely took away the life of free.
Hey, Michael, you might be muted. Still can't hear you.
Allison,
There you go. There
there
it
was
is.
internet trouble, right? You didn't hear a thing. What did I say?
You were talking about how the pandemic really kind of changed your sense of
Let me
security and
start over.
freedom. Sure.
Yeah, let me go ahead and start over. As I said before, coronavirus, ever since it got created, it completely took away the life of freedom that I used to have. And it gave me a brand new remoted life of being locked in my home forever, separating myself from the outside world as it is now coronavirus infected. And I fear the moment that if I ever go far out there, I will get the virus and die. So I fear I must stay locked in my home and never go out into the outside world ever again, now that it's very deadly, as I try to enjoy my life while I still can before COVID somehow gets his hands on me and takes away my life.
It's scary with, everything that we see day to day on the TV, on the news, in articles. Is that something that's impacted you, reading the news and watching things like that?
Bingo! I call it the nightmare news. Yeah, the usual news that I sometimes watch. Now I've been watching it every day, and it's become known as the nightmare news. Every day is bad news, bad news, bad news, bad news. Ay, nightmare. I fear my future is, well, originally when I thought. I picture the coronavirus succeeded in its diabolical plot of eliminating all of humanity from the face of the earth, leaving nothing but virus-infected dead bodies all over the ground, especially me. That's why I want to enjoy my life before the virus destroys us all.
Yeah. Well,
And yeah, sorry. And
yeah.
I want to enjoy being happy, being locked in this home before everyone's taken away from me. And then I'm next. And the next thing you know, my body is lying on the ground, not buried or something, or cremated or something.
It sounds like a big spiral. You see something on the news and it just feels like it's getting worse and worse and worse, right?
Yeah.
And you just start to picture all of these really terrible things that can happen. Is there anything that you do daily or when you start to feel anxious like that, to help yourself kind of stay grounded or stay calm?
Well, there are some things. To start things off, I watch the television of the past, shows that I've watched since childhood. They cheer me up. Shows that are not on anymore, but it was good television, so I watch it 24/7 ever since, especially movies. Yeah, show that could cheer me up and give me some happiness before I eventually die. There's also my project, of course. When I find an opportunity to do with my project, it puts me in a good mood, and I work on it right away until it's finished, and then I have nothing to work on.
Yeah, so Laquanya mentioned that social media and finding a community of people can be a really important tool or resource for someone with mental illness or autism in your case. Is that something that you feel like has helped you in any way, is connecting with other people?
Well, there are three things about that. For starters, I'm not on social media just yet because I fear it'd be too busy-ish for me, not unlike organizations like DRNY. But I picture giving it a chance eventually. Second, as a high-functioning autistic, I have a long way to go with my project. And number 3, I managed to somehow connect during my interviews. Yeah, I feel like when I'm doing my interviews on my channel, I'm connecting with my interviewees. They're remote interviews, of course, but they work out for us.
How was it for you going from, because I know you were doing a lot of interviews before because you came into our office one time to do in-person interviews before COVID. How has it been moving from that kind of typical face-to-face to doing everything virtually for you?
It was okay. Well, and just to clarify, that wasn't involved with me. That was a TV news crew thing that I was with. A group of advocates that were a TV news crew. They were there to interview Boss Mark himself. I was just one of the workers. But as
Still
for
pretty
me,
important.
yeah. But as for me, right, it really felt new. The life as I know it taken away from me forever, and I'm given a brand new remoted life of no freedom.
Mhm. And you're a student, you mentioned. How has that been for you, going to class online now?
Well, I didn't want to try out the college life in the beginning, back before the freedom, but the organization that I was with convinced me to give it a try. And just when I was in my first year, yeah, the pandemic happened, and then next thing you know, I'm having a remote college life. So it gave me the feeling that I probably should have taken it in the first place and just stayed in my old program. Because I picture the pandemic will last even longer up to my final college year, and it'll be remote graduation. Yeah, I fear. No, not fear. I have a hunch that will happen. My bad.
Yeah. What do you like about the virtual world of going to school?
What do I like about it? I have no comments about that, to be honest.
Can
I'm
you tell
used to
us a
it.
little bit about what you're studying?
Well, I don't know. I'm studying. I just focus on my future goals. One of my future goals is to work on my project, of course, hoping to make it further ahead. I mean, take it further ahead, higher.
Sure.
And I hope to eventually get a job. I'm jobless at the moment, but I hope to find a job related to my career interest. One of them is advocating.
And
And I hope to eventually be independent. I lost all my independence that I've learned so far because I'm locked in my home.
what kind of things do you miss about able to step outside your door and confident and not scared about going into the
What was
world?
it like? Okay, I can explain that. I felt like I was independent at the moment. All right. My favorite transportation is trains, so I was getting used to taking the train every day to my college program. And I was also getting used to taking it every day to meet with other advocates to go on trips. And I also got used to taking the train to my gym time. Yeah. And I also got used to going out on my birthday, taking a train trip, going out somewhere where I was by myself, learning how to be independent, how to be on my own. But all that taken away from me.
Yeah. And now, what's your living situation? Are you in an apartment by yourself? Do you have roommates?
I live with family in a house.
Okay. Is that nice to be with other people?
Yeah, it's okay to live with family.
I'm sure that might help sometimes if you feel like you need to talk, or if anything is particularly concerning or upsetting that day. Like we've talked about, having someone or a group of people to turn to is a nice option. I know for me, at least, that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
So what do I know you mentioned that you think the pandemic is going to drag on, and I think we're all unfortunately kind of living that reality, but in the future, what does the future look like for you? What are you most excited about as things hopefully start to ease back up and open up a little bit in a
I
safe
don't want
way?
to. Oh, sorry. I don't want to disappoint you, Allison, but to be honest, I lost all hope for the future, as I fear COVID-19 will last forever. It will not stop until it destroys all living beings off the face of the earth. It will make me stay remote forever, and it will take us all off the earth at some point. And I want to enjoy my life before that happens. I'm the next target for some reason. I won't like that, of course, but I fear I have to get used to it. I see no hope in freedom or reopening at this rate.
It's hard. It can feel pretty oppressive with what you've been talking about, with all the news, anxiety, and everything that kind of piles on every day. Before I move on to our last panelist, is there anything that you want to mention that you have as a resource or as advice for people who might be feeling similarly to how you're feeling?
I'm sure no one feels exactly how I feel. Filled with anxiety with no hope for the future by COVID-19 pandemic. But I will say this, as an advocate who still wishes to become any kind of help for the autistic community remotely, I hope to get a chance to earn more opportunities to advocate more with my project. Yeah, that's all I'm aiming for, while at the same time search for a job so I can get paid well for my services.
Absolutely. Those are two really good and important things to keep you focused and give you something to work towards. So I thank you for your comments and for being so open about what you have shared with us today. I'll be bringing you back in a little bit just to answer a couple more questions, but I want to move on to our final panelist, Dr. Andy Cohen. He is a pediatric psychiatrist and assistant professor in the departments of psychiatry and pediatrics at URMC. His practice advocates enhancing behavioral health integration within pediatric primary care. Dr. Cohen, could you give just a quick physical description and an introduction, please?
Hi, Allison. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So my name is Andy Cohen. My pronouns are he and his. I am a Caucasian male in my still hanging on to early 40s with medium-ish length brown hair and brown eyes, wearing a blue checkered shirt, pink tie, navy vest, festively emblazoned with superhero kid icons, representing Golisano Children's Hospital, where I work. I'm seated in front of a blurred Zoom background that does a pretty good job of not showing the chaos in my therapy office.
Thank you. So I have a similar set of questions for you to those that I asked Laquanya in the beginning. And so I want to first start with just getting your take on what you've noticed in terms of trends, issues, things that have come up in the past 18 months that might be surprising to someone who's not regularly in the mental health field.
Oh, so that's a twist. So what's my experience been, and what's surprising, what may be surprising to others? So I'll try to reach that far. I think some important context is I work within a pediatric practice, and so I see tons of kiddos, but they're all kiddos within our practice. And our practice, our patient population largely sees kiddos and families from an incredibly under-resourced area of urban Rochester and upstate New York. And so life has been challenging enough. I mean, more than challenging for a lot of these families. And so my experience has been that COVID has exacerbated things for everyone, and I would say in some ways even more so for those who are already working against huge social determinants of health barriers and a number of other challenges. So I think, I think for me and for our patients, kiddos, families, it's been stressful. How to connect, how to connect to families, how to help families connect to already limited resources that become even more limited during the pandemic, and having access to and availability of resources, and have that be unpredictable, to not know if you can reach for supports that we typically try to hook up to connect to our families. I think it's been, as Laquanya elegantly stated, it's been stressful from my perspective to see the increasing acuity of just challenges and problems and barriers and speed bumps in terms of, challenging acuity in terms of behavioral health, anxiety, depression, trauma, domestic violence. in context with decreasing supports. Like those are not very compatible, to have increasing acuity and decreasing supports and resources. You know, it has been rewarding, you know, to be able, the feeling to be able to provide general support, reflective listening, just to be present, to be a reservoir, a vessel to hear and to understand and provide empathy, as well as to provide specific interventions and recommendations and resources when you know, oh, this office that can totally help you, they just opened their doors back and they would be really helpful. Here's who to talk to. So, you know, I don't know if any of that is surprising to anyone working in any field within the pandemic. But it's been, if it's felt a little bit stressful or crushing at times to me or the provider, okay, but it's got to be that, and even more so for, you know, families in need, those with non-obvious disabilities. I'll pause and let you frame the next question.
Sure. I appreciate that insight and all of those observations. And I think you're coming from a really interesting perspective of working not only maybe with the individuals, but with the family systems, which is something that obviously has to be taken into account, no matter who your patient might be, but in particular, if you're working with kids. So in terms of that, have you noticed that you're seeing maybe an increase in kids who are coming in needing services? And do you feel like there's some link with the pandemic there?
Yeah, and I think the not only news, depending on what source you get it from, but I think lots of evidence-based research, even in a short amount of time, has demonstrated pretty strongly that there's more than just correlation. There's been causation in terms of COVID has contributed to, has caused the collapse of a lot of supports, and has, you know, led to the increase in severity, acuity, presence of a ton of different obvious and non-obvious disabilities. So yeah, I think that it's pretty safe to say that COVID has wrecked a lot of the infrastructure and made things way harder and way more challenging, you know, for everyone. And so I think in terms of helping kiddos, I think we as a pediatric practice, we think pretty broadly in terms of thinking kiddos, great, but also helping the family. And that also has been just really hard. And I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but it's been so hard for our families where, you know, you would have daycares and schools open to not only help the kiddos, but then it allows, you know, families to get out and go work and do. And with everything shut down, on one hand, you know, you had asked, you know, Michael, oh, it's got to be pretty nice to be with some family. And sure, for some families, it's really great. And for a lot of families, it's become a powder keg of stress, anxiety, and all you have is the indoors and each other. And that's a blessing and a challenge. So I think, you know, we've tried our best to do even more helping the whole family. So, you know, not only the whole child, but the whole family. And that's a tall task. But we're doing our best. And I think across institutions, across agencies, across disciplines, I think everyone is doing their best. But it's just been so hard because I think everyone would say before the pandemic, there wasn't enough. We need more resources. We need more access. And again, facing even more of an uphill battle with, you know, your hiking shoes have come off, you know, your walking sticks broken. It's been hard.
And, you know, if you have any kind of example or something that paints the picture a little bit more, what kind of advice or resources would you give to these families who come in and say, you know, we're really struggling and we just don't know where to turn? Maybe it's a child with a non-obvious disability. Maybe it's a child that they're concerned about, as you mentioned, that isolation leading to something. How do you have that conversation and where do you go from there as a parent?
Yeah, so it's a good question, pretty wide ranging. I think I'll step back for a moment and frame it in terms of if we're talking about non-obvious disabilities, before the pandemic, non-obvious disabilities, often I would frame it as, with families, with kiddos and families, what is a disability? And this is, taking a broad frame, but what is a disability? Is it a condition? Is it a condition that is well managed or controlled or not well managed? Is it a condition that contributes or doesn't to functional impairment, not being able to do what you want to do fairly easily? Or is it any of these things that I've mentioned that may exist that you now have decreased supports? Like before, it wouldn't have been considered, quote unquote, or the person might not have considered it a non-obvious disability, but now it's become a disability because you don't have in-person school supports that you normally would have. You don't have daycare to provide some enrichment for the kids and also some much needed rest and break for family members. So I think the idea of non-obvious also is even more non-obvious, given, not for everyone, but the non-obvious has become even more non-obvious in terms of disability, given the disconnect, the isolation, the lack of interpersonal interaction. And so, like, if you're not seen in person, it's very hard to connect. It's very hard to understand what a disability or a challenge, however you want to frame it, kind of looks like, presents as, if you can't see the person in person, if you can't even see the person based on lack of technology, if you've got technology but it's super jittery and your connection keeps getting dropped, it's really hard to not be able to show up. It's hard enough to show up in person and say, here's what I need, here are my challenges, problems, disabilities, and it's just kind of escalated big time with this huge disconnect. And so, related to that of like, what is a disability and how do you know it's a disability, especially with all the disconnect? What quote unquote counts as a disability? Are we talking medical, physical, developmental, learning and intellectual, emotional, behavioral? And I'll go potentially further and say more broadly, like, at what point do social factors, social determinants of health, at what point do we consider them, if not a disability, a significant barrier? I mean, they've been considered a barrier, such as poverty, housing, food insecurity. It's hard to do from my work, behavioral health interventions, let me help you with anxiety, depression. Let me help you with coping skills. Let me help you with, ways to reframe it. All of that falls really short, or feels like it can fall really short when you're connecting over a really insecure, data line and it keeps dropping. Or, if, I'm going to talk to a kiddo about depression and they're living in a shelter and it's their third shelter in 2 weeks, it's just really hard to overcome that, in terms of trying to help when the basics aren't being met. And so, it probably took us far afield from where you were asking, Allison, but I think a lot of the kind of truisms that I would go to before, I've tried to help kiddos and families to, enhance communication with whomever needs it, within the family, outside of the family, and to, the early bird doesn't always get the worm. The squeaky wheel doesn't always, get the oil. But the idea of trying to highlight and emphasize and recommend persistence and resilience and calling it out when you see it, that is amazing that, they didn't pick up, they weren't there, but let's try that again, because, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So let's try calling again right now here in our visit to do the thing. So trying to help with the resilience to keep at it, because the resources are so inconsistent and so thin, helping them to connect and reconnect to get their needs met. Because once they stop asking for their needs, whether it's a disability, considered a disability or not, it becomes a much bigger barrier and challenge without the resources. So.
No, it's great. And I really appreciate you bringing in all of these factors that are I think, so apparent to people who maybe deal with this routinely, but for people who might not be regularly working with individuals who have these non-obvious disabilities and also have all of these other factors that might be weighted against them in some way, or requiring that level of resilience, it's a hard thing to fathom. That topic of resilience is really interesting, and I'm wondering if that's something in particular that you feel like has become even more of an important teaching element when you're working with families or kids in light of the pandemic. Is that something that you feel like you're kind of coming back to more? Because I feel like we're at a point where we were hearing on the news a lot, just keep pushing, we're almost there, stay resilient. And I wonder how much of that kind of translates in mental health treatment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, in general, reinforcement, praise, positivity, positive consequences, the research is really clear that reinforcement is more effective than punishment. So in general, we talk about, quote unquote, catching a kid while they're being good. So even if it's the smallest piece or like the first step toward like really desired behavior or positive progress, you want to call it out. And so I'm trying to call it out even more. Hey, you showed up. I know, Dr. Cohen, but I was 15 minutes late. It's okay. You're here. I'm here, and we're doing this. So let's get what we can do and move it forward. And in terms of helping out with kiddos and teenagers, young adults, awesome. But then I'm also trying to. It's not an I. It's not a me thing. It's a we thing. We are really trying to help refill. It's hard to pour. If you're a pitcher, it's hard to pour if you're empty. And so we're trying to refill or fill up or help parents and guardians and caregivers to refill themselves because, I can be great with a kiddo. Kiddo can be great with me, but they see me once every week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. That's, I'm good. I'm not that good. And so it's really helping the system, helping the family system help the kid, helping the family system connect with different resources, whether it's school, whether it's DRNY, whether it's, the school district, or whether it's, for what it's worth, I've also, personally walked over or helped to connect adults who are falling through the cracks so that they can help themselves in order to, I've helped a lot of adults get back into their own primary care and get back into their own behavioral health care. It's the idea of, when the plane hits turbulence and the oxygen mask comes down, everyone kind of knows this, and it's tried and true and a little trite, but the truisms are truisms for a reason. If you're the adult, you got to put on the mask yourself first, get some breath, and then help your kiddo. So I'm saying all things that probably resonate or probably we all follow anyway. But all of those things have been magnified in terms of their importance because especially doing, therapy or interventions over the phone or over Zoom or, we have many families coming in now, and that might change tomorrow or next week with, the Delta variant or whatever New York guidelines come through. Really trying to do what we've done before, but even more so highlight the power and resilience and agency of the adults in the room so they can help the kids do their best. It's what we've done before, but it's taking it to a different level and trying to do this work when the stakes are higher, the acuity is escalated, and the resources are thinner and less predictable in terms of accessing them.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point as well about now with potentially new guidelines and the Delta variant, we might be heading back more towards that lockdown familiarity that we had a year ago, a year plus. And I'm wondering, in terms of now that more patients have come through, more kids and adults with these non-obvious disabilities and with whatever challenges they present with, how do you feel like disclosure for them is working these days in this virtual world where we're still kind of navigating how much we're able to do in person, how comfortable we are talking face to face versus a Zoom call.
You know, I think that the issue of disclosure is related but separate from, you know, you can disclose challenges, disabilities, concerns, barriers that you have. And then there's a related but still separate issue of reaching out and or accepting resources. You know, I would say in general, you know, the majority of our patient population that we see is African American, and African American population with historic amounts of barriers and challenges facing them. And there's a lot of concern or caution for the majority of our population to discuss issues of mental health, or to ask for help with you know, medical services, or just the idea of owning something. You hear it a lot of, you know, I can't show emotion, or I can't ask for this because it's going to be a sign of weakness. And as far as my work with a variety of populations, I understand that, and especially the African American population, who have been mistreated in so many ways that I am not an expert with a lived experience or otherwise to discuss. It's, you know, the idea of disclosure and coming forth with things that are sensitive and vulnerable, and there's good reason for why that is. It's made the work challenging to not have them in the room all the time, or not have like direct connection with them, to really encourage and practice with them how to discuss some of it with me and with the family, so then they can take it to the agencies or other disciplines within our pediatric practice, so that they can get their needs met. So it's, you know, some idea of acknowledging where they are. Sometimes if they're not bringing it, observing it, saying, hey, I think it might be this, and helping them to own it, acknowledge it, and then to discuss and help them discuss if they want to be able to, you know, do you have concerns in life? No. Oh, life is perfect? Well, no. Okay, so then you've got concerns. Yeah, I've got concerns. All right, and so do you need any help with making those concerns go better? No, I'm good. Oh, you're good. So you've got concerns, but you don't need help. But then if you didn't need help, why wouldn't your concerns already be better? Yeah, I probably do need some help. Okay, so then the next step is some version of disclosure, of reaching out and talking about it and saying, hey, I've got this and I need help in this way. And so it's sitting with, it's walking with, talking with, and doing with families to help them get what they need. And again, one of the first steps, if not the first step, is acknowledging it, owning it, and then communicating assertively what you've got going on and what you think you might need to help it go better.
That sounds like really, really effective advice. And I hope that, you know, anyone listening who maybe needs some thoughts about how the process is really able to take that in. I want to the end of time, and I want to give a chance for Michael and Laquanya to join and see if they have any final thoughts to offer on what we've been discussing together, or any final remarks based on what they've heard from other panelists. So in these last couple of minutes, I just want to open the floor to either of you two to jump back in before I wrap things up.
Does the other one have something to say?
Michael, I'm curious to hear from you. Laquanya and I do lots of the treatment providing, and you know, you're one with lived experience. I mean, we all have lived experiences, but you have lived experience in a different way of non-obvious disability. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are after participating so far in the panel.
Well, all I can say is this. I'm currently trying my best as an amateur to be as good as all of you advocates are doing. I mean, you've done well for the disability community, and so did you, Laquanya. I still have a long way to go with my project.
Well, we certainly look forward to seeing them, learning more about them, and having you on more DRNY publications to get yourself out there. So thank you for that. Since we are pretty close to time, I'm just going to have a couple of wrap-up announcements. I want to take time again to thank our really phenomenal panelists for their time today, how much they've been willing to share. And I'm so encouraged by a lot of what I'm hearing from the conversation in terms of the resources out there, the help that's out there, and the people who are wanting to ensure that everyone with disabilities, and in particular these non-obvious disabilities, are getting hooked up to these resources, even in this really strange new normal pandemic world that we're living in. So as a reminder, next week at the same time at 3 o'clock, we will be having our final panel discussion, which is entirely devoted to answering any questions that anyone might have from our first 3 discussions. So please feel free to check out the past recordings and send any questions that you might have to disclosureqa@drny.org. And we really look forward to hearing from you, hearing your thoughts, and hopefully continuing this conversation long beyond this series. Thanks again to DRNY for the support in hosting this, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.